do a review in Likutei Sichos and Chelek Yutes. This is volume 19, and we're doing the fourth Sicha in Igeres Hateshuvah. This is the explanation that the Rebbe bases himself on his father's notes on the Igeres Hateshuvah. And then the Rebbe explains the general idea in this Perek, in the fourth Perek, in the Igeres Hateshuvah, based on the note of his father. In this particular note, the Rebbe's father just makes a mention of points out several languages used by the Alter Rebbe without giving us the explanation. And the Rebbe will interpret this that just by pointing out these language exchanges, we can learn from this what the meaning, the explanation in this whole chapter that the Alter Rebbe is trying to explain. It's a very detailed, and the Alter Rebbe discusses how the Sephiros of Chochmah, Bina, and then this Midos, the six Midos, and Malchus are hinted in the name of Yud K Vav K. And the Alter Rebbe also says that in the letter, basically in the letter Yud is the letter Chochmah. The letter first Hey is the Sfiras Abina. The Vav, which is the six Midos, Zo, and the Hey, the final Hey, is the Sfiras Malchus. And the Alter Rebbe also brings down that in the Yud, which is Chochmah, there is also the point of the Yud that hints to the level of Rotzen. The Rebbe is going to explain, based upon the note of his father in great detail, the connection between the various spheres with the shape of the letters, and whether they just hint or they're included, they're mislavish. We'll go step by step. It's like I said, a very detailed and a very specific and a beautiful explanation how these spheres in the Shem Havaya, and also how it manifests itself to the person, that the person has also the Shem Havaya in his neshama, Chelek Havaya Amoy, and how the person that reaches atonement, this is Igeres Hateshuvah, through tapping into the higher level of Rotzin, and yet there is a connection, but it's still higher. It is both, as the Rebbe will explain. But let's go step by step inside. Igeres Hateshuvah Dalet. Aleph. In vierten Perek von Igeres Hateshuvah, in the fourth chapter of Igeres Hateshuvah, is that Alter Rebbe Mevayer, the Alter Rebbe explains v'azoi how kol hayud sviris nichlolis v'nirmozis b'shem Havaya Baruch Hu. All 10 spheres, Chochmah, Bina, Das, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, Malchus. All the 10 spheres are included. The Alter Rebbe uses the Lashon, are included and are hinted, V'nirmozis, Nichlolis, V'nirmozis, are included and are hinted, B'shem Havaya Baruch, in the name Havaya, in the name Yud Kei Vav Kei, so that the 10 spheres are included in Yud Kei Vav Kei and hinted in Yud Kei Vav Kei. The Rebbe will stand on this Lashon, the Rebbe's father included and hinted. And this is talking about all spheres, as the Rebbe will bring out, are all included and all hinted in the specific name, in the name Hashem, Yud Kei Vav Kei. How specifically do they divide the 10 spheres? They have association. They're included and hinted in one of the 4 letters of Shem Havaya. And the Alter Rebbe explains. This is not Ki Hayud Shi B'chinas Nekuda Levad, the Yud of the name Yud Kei Vav Kei, the Yud which is merely a point. It's not a wide, it's not a long letter, it's just a small point, a letter of a dot, basically. It's a nekuda, levad. That is meramezes lichochmasa yizbarich. That hints to Hashem's level of chokhmah, the sfiras chokhmah, to his blessed chokhmah. The Alter Rebbe adds in a parenthesis, v'hakoyt she'al hayud, and the point which is on the top of the yud, roimez lebchinas rotzin el yin baruch hu, that hints to the rotzin of the Supreme, blessed be He. So in the yud, you have 2 parts. You have the dot itself, and you have the point on the top of the yud. That point, the first point of the yud, hints of the rotzin to the supreme will, and the letter itself hints to chacham. Alter Rebbe continues later on. Unochdem vidin nekuda kumtarop, in his spashtus vigilui hahasoga v'hahavona. That point later on, after it descends, comes down, and it comes down into expansion and revelation that you can grasp and understand. The nekuda you don't understand. When it comes down to the level of understanding, which is bina, that becomes from chokhmah, it descends into bina, basically. So the Alter Rebbe says, then nichleles v'nirmezes be'ois hey. Then that level of bina is included, and it's hinted in the letter hey. So here again, the Rebbe, Alter Rebbe, uses that the level of bina, when there is the gilui of asoga v'havone, that is both uses like is included and hinted in the letter hey. In the letter hey, you have included that the level of bina. So by chokhmah, he says just meramezes, not that b'nichlal, but it says meramezes. As the reason I'm saying all this is because that's what the Rebbe's father is going to say, and it's going to be the point that the Rebbe is basing himself on in the different of the languages. But so that's the that's when we talk about bina, that when the chokhmah comes into his pashtus and gilui hasoga v'havona, that we can understand, it's revealed because we can understand and grasp it. So then that level of bina is included and hinted in the letter hey of the Yud Kei. Then the hamshocha v'hashpoa kumtarop, the Alter Rebbe continues that when this extends and the flow descends yoser lamato, even below, nichleles v'nirmezes hamshocha zu, so then this extension that is extended into the midos, this is included and hinted ba'oisius vav kei, in the letters of vav kei, comes down into the zo and malchus, into the 6 midos, and into malchus. When it goes down, that's the letters of, so it's included and hinted in the letters vav kei chut. It is the nochme vayir, as the Alter Rebbe later on explains, as the hamshocha is al yidei midos of yizbarach, that how does this come down? That is through we say the Amshocha that comes from Bina further down, the way it comes down, descends, is through Hashem's midas. The midas are 6 midas, Hanichlolus b'mispar sheish, which are included in the number 6. We call the Vav. Vav is the numerical value of 6. That represents the 6 midas. And then it goes further down in midas Malchus Yisbarach into the level of Malchus. And that is included and hinted, the level of Malchus is hinted in the last hay of the Shem Havaya. You have Yud K, Vav K, the first hay and the second hay. This is included and hinted in the second hay of the Shem Havaya. So when you look specifically at the Lashonis, the specific language, you see that when he talks about Bina, Zod, the 6 spheres, and Malchus, he uses in all cases the Lashon Nichleles v'nirmezes. Nichleles v'nirmezes ba'is hey, Nichleles v'nirmezes ba'is yis vav kei, and Miz Malchus Nichleles v'nirmezes ba'is kei achrena. Always the double Lashon, Nichlal v'nirmas. Above, when he talked about the level of Chochmah specifically, over there it says that it's Meramezes la Chochmah Yisbarich. It doesn't say Nichlelis. There's also, over there it says Meramezes in the language. Let's see, the Rebbe's father is going to point out the specific, which is the basis for the Rebbe's explanation, how there is, by the level of Bina, Zoh and Malchus, they are included in their letters, in the K, Vav, K, the 3-letter letters. And by the letter Yud, by Chochmah, it's not Nichlolos, but it's only Nirmas. And also the same by the Koitzer Shel Yud. And still, the Alter Rebbe begins all this by saying, Kol HaYud Shviras Nichlolos v'Nirmoses, as the Rebbe will bring out. I know it's confusing, but that's the Sikha. I'm teaching the Sikha, but the to pay attention the exact wording, and you'll see. Let's look inside. Let's see what the Rebbe's father says. Stellt sich der Tati in seine Ha'oris auf Tanya. So my father, on his notes on the Tanya, bases himself of drei Shinuyim in dem Loshon von Alten Rebbe, on 3 changes, differences in the language of the Alter Rebbe, beim Batzeichenen, die Sheiches von the Oisies Hashem to the Spheres, when he points to the connection of the letters of the name, the Yud Kei Vav Kei, he uses different languages, how they associate to the Spheres, to Chochmah, Bina, Zoh, and Malchus. Benegeya zum Koitzshe al Hayud. So first we're going to see, with regards to the point, the level of the parenthesis that the Alta brought down. When he talks about the point that is on top of the Yud, Zokter, over there it says, Roimes lebchinas rotzena elyin baruch hu. That hints. There's 2 ways. Meramezes or roimes. Here it says roimes lebchinas rotzena elyin baruch hu. Nit meramez. It doesn't say it. It says roimes. The Rebbe will explain later on the difference between the roimes and merames. Merames means a heavier. Roimes is a lighter. In other words, it's a further away. The hint is less when it says the word roimes. Merames means more. But the Rebbe's father points out that by the Koitzer Shel Yud, the Alter Rebbe writes, Roimes lebchinas rotzena elyin baruch hu. It hints nit merames. Beim Yud, but the Yud itself, not about the point. When we talk about Chochmah, Nokat Miramezes, Veloy Roimezes. Over there it says Miramezes with the Mem, not the Roimezes. The Sof Roimezes, that doesn't make a difference. The difference is the Mem that comes before. That by the Koitsha Ala Yud, the Alter Rebbe uses the Loshon Roimez, and the talking about the Yud, he says Meramis. Another point, by the Tzvei, by the first two, when we talk about the Koitsha Shel Yud, Yud v'Koitz Shel Ala Yud, we talk about the Rotzin and Chochmah, the Yud and the Koitz Shel Yud, Zokter B'Seider, over there he says in the order, he says that the Yud and the Koitz Shel Yud, as they seinen Meramis und Roimes, the two languages. He says the Yud and the Koitz Shel also Yud are Meramis and Roimes, the two languages. Meramis and Roimes that the Rebbe pointed of Chochmah v'Keser, Rotzen, that they point to Chochmah, Keser, Keser is Rotzen, Chochmah and Keser. So it says that these letters are meramis to them neat, but it doesn't say as Chochmah v'Keser merumozim b'Yud v'Koitzei, that Chochmah and Keser are hinted in the Yud and the Koitzei. Yud, the Koitzei Yud are meramis, but not that in Chochmah and Keser, that Chochmah and Keser are hinted in it. The Rebbe will explain later on. This is also shows on a furtherance of the connection. Compare that Mash'enkim by Bina Zo Malchus, but by Bina Zo and Malchus in the next three talk about the K Vav K, which is Bina Zo Malchus Nokat Behepech. Over there he says the opposite. We don't say Azei Zainen Nirmozi Ba'isius Havav Hey Vav K D'Shem, that they are hinted in the letters of, doesn't say that the Hey Vav K are meramis to them, like it says by the Yud and Koitzus Yud, but it says they are Nirmozim Unitas the Oisius Hey Vav Hey Meramzim Meremzim Lehem, not that they hinted them. So the Rebbe will point out what difference does it make, but the Rebbe's father just points out the order in the difference between the Koitzish Yud and the Yud, which is Chochmah and Keser, versus the way the Alter Rebbe writes with regards to the K Vav K, which is Bina, Midos, and Malchus. Noch HaChiluk, noch HaShinut Zvishon Chochmah v'Keser and Bina, so Malchus, on the additional difference between Chochmah and Keser and the other three, Bina, Zo, Malchus. By Bina, Zo, Malchus, Nutzter, over there, by Bina, Zo, Malchus, he uses nit nor dem Loshon nirmezes, hinted, as we find it here, Nareich Loshon kolal, nichleles. He used also that it's included, not just hinted. Aber by Chochmah v'Keser, but when we talk about Chochmah v'Keser, le'nokat b'hem loshon kolol, he doesn't look that they're included by Chochmah, and nutz them nor them loshon remes, meramezes, roimes, only hinted, but doesn't say included. That's what he points out, the Rebbe's father, in the notes, in the languages of the Alter Rebbe. In Zain Ha'ore Hanal, in his note of above, is der Tate nit mevayer dem tam of the Shinui Manal. My father doesn't explain the reason why these changes. He just points out, Zogt Blois, or he says, Duk Belishna, look into the language. He assumed as blois durch onmerken of die Shinuyim Manal, just by pointing out to these above, these changes, that man allein zichen and chappen. You'll on your own, you'll be able to catch on, be after properly looking into analyzing it from beer, you understand the beer. He doesn't give you the beer. But and the Rebbe is going to point out that actually, when the Alter Rebbe, as we pointed when it starts off, he says all the 10 spheres are included and hinted. So we also have the Lashon in the beginning before he splits them up into the details. But the Rebbe sums up the differences, base. From the Diyukim Hanal kommt euch, from the above mentioned wording, the Diyukim, turns out as a Zainando Drai Eifani, that there are 3 ways. Der Koitz Shel Al Hayud is Blois Roimes. When we talk about the point that's on top of the Yud, over there is not Meramez, this is just Roimes. Is Blois Roimes Lebchinas Rotzon Ha'elyon. That is merely hints to the supreme will. But it's not Merames, it's only Roimes. But when we talk about the Yud itself, the Nekuda fun Ois Yud, but the point of the Yud, not the Koitz, the Yud itself, the point of the Yud, is Miramezes l'chokhmas yisbarach. Over there it's not the Roimes, but it's with the extra mem, Miramez l'chokhmas yisbarach. In the Oisius, Hey Vav Hey, in addition to Roimes, Miramezes, is Nichlolish in Nirmozis. Including Nirmas, the Spheres Bina Zo Malchus, the Spheres of Bina Zo Malchus are both included and hinted in the letters Hey Vav Hey. But if the Alter Rebbe starts off by saying that all the 10 spheres, and over there he uses the Lashon, Kol Hayut Spheres Nichlolish V'Nirmozis, meaning also the letter of Chochmah, the level of Yud. From them was that Alter Rebbe is Magdim. From the fact that the Alter Rebbe introduces this whole sentence by saying, V'chol hayud sfiris nichlolish v'nirmozis b'shem havaya baruch hu. All of the 10 spheres are included and hinted, uses both the Lashon of Nichlolis and Nirmozis and hinted in the name Havaya Baruch and the name Yud Kei Vav Kei, is mashma, so it's understood, it seems as Oich of Chochmah, that also of Chochmah, which is Basis Eine for the Yud Spheres, which is one of the 10 spheres, Zokman Bichlolu, so in a general way, we also say as Nit Nor, is that Ois Yud Merames here. It's not only that the letter Yud hints for the level of Chochmah, but Nor Oich, even on the Yud, we're saying that Chochmah is Nichleles V'Nirmezes in them Ois Yud from Shem Havaya, that it's also included and hinted in the letter of Yud of the Shem Havaya. That is specifically for the actual Yud, because Chochmah is part of the 10 spheres. Rotzin is not. Keser is not. As opposed to the level of the Rotzin Elyon Baruch Hu. Was is Hecher from the Yud spheres, which is higher than the spheres, 10 spheres. Can man nicht sagen, as he is nichleles v'nirmezes in them koitz al hayud. Over there, you can't say that the rotzin, the keser, is also included in the koitz al hayud, because it's not nichlal over there. That's the distinction. There's haste, which really means the letter as in Sfiras HaChochmah, that in the Sfiras Chochmah there is 2 aspects. it is one of the 10 spheres. It also has a connection to higher, to the level of Ratzon. Aleph. There's two aspects. Number one, dos vaziz eine von the Yud spheres, that it is one of the 10 spheres, which means the hotatzad hashove with the andere spheres, it has a common denominator with the other spheres. Umitzadem inyan shaba, and that aspect in Chokhmah, that it's part and a common with the other 10 spheres, is in nichlelas v'nirmezes in them yud. That's why it is both included and hinted in the yud. That's why when the Alter Rebbe says in the beginning all the 10 spheres, but then when it comes to talk about specifically about Chokhmah, the number two, that aspect is that it's higher. Dos vaziz hecher from the andere spheres. This, that Chokhmah is higher than the other spheres. Busy is in gewisse inyonim to the extent that it's different, that in certain aspect, it's similar to the level of Ratzon Elyon. Was there far? Because of that part of Chokhmah, because of the fact that it's distinct and it's higher and it's similar to the Ratzon Elyon. Aleph zokt v'nitefir loshen klal nichlelos. We don't say that it's included. Und beis zivet nit nirmes in ois yud. We don't say that it is hinted in the letter of yud, like we say by the other lashon, the seder, as the Rebbe brought down before from his father, that it's not that it is hinted in ois yud, that Chokhmah is hinted, but we say not leipach, the yud is merames if it's only hinting on it, which is a further relationship between the yud and the Chokhmah to tell you that it's not only is it not nichlal, but it's also not nirmas, but rather it's roimes on it, as the Rebbe will explain. Gimel. The Rebbe is going to explain now, Bichlal, why are we even talking about Rotzen in the parenthesis about the Koitzer Shel Yud? We are trying to explain the Shem Havaya in the Nefesh HaAdam and how Avera separates the hay and the tshuva, that it brings back the hay, and the Shem Havaya, but it doesn't seem like in Avodas HaAdam it's important to know that level of Ratzon. We only need to know about the Yud Kei Vav Kei, the Chokhmah, etc. It doesn't say by the person, by the Adam. The Rebbe is going to explain that actually it is all because there's an association to the level of Ratzon. That's why there can be the level of Tshuva and Slicha. Let's look inside. Gimel. The biur in the Ale Diyukim, the explanation, all of these points pointed out, specific languages used, und the Sheiches Miyuchedes zum Teuchen Kloli, and also the special connection of all this to the general idea, the general content, was Retzich Do in Igeres Hateshuvah, that we're talking about here in the level of Tshuva, how it's associated to this idea of Teshuvah. Was Mahai Taima merkt on der Tate of the Yukim Davke. That's why my father points out this specific pointers, specifics, in order to point out, because this is what explains the general idea over here in the Igeres Hateshuvah. So we will understand it by first what we need to understand here. We need to understand here why the Alter Rebbe brings in the level of Nukuda, the Koitze Shel Yud, the level of Rotzit. The Alter Rebbe is doch dom oisen zu mevayer sein. Alter Rebbe intending here to explain the kol hayud sviris nichlolis v'nirmoses b'shem havaya baruch hu. He wants to say that all of the 10 sviris are included and hinted in the name of Hashem Baruch Hu. So he starts off this statement that all of the 10 spheres are included and hinted in the name Yud Kei Vav Kei. So why is it over here connect to say, why is he telling us, even it's in a parentheses, even such in a percent in a Chatzoy Eagle, in a parentheses, as der koitz shel Allah Yud, Remes lebchinas rotzin ha'elyin baruch hu, that the point that is on top of the Yud hints to the level of rotzin ha'elyin, shalamayla mayla mimadregas b'chinas chochmei lochel, which is higher and higher than the level of Sefrim Chochm. Why does the Alter Rebbe bring down about the rotzin ha'elyin, what's hinted in the koitz shel Yud, when we're talking about here the 10 spheres that are included in the Shem Havaya? Who's talking about? Why is it important to talk about and to mention about what's going on with the Koitzer Shel Yud and about level of Ratzah? The Kashi is noch starker. The question is even greater. Der Biur do in the Dalet Oisius Shem Havaya. This explanation about the 4 letters of the Shem Havaya, the Chochma, the Sviras, the Chochma, Bina, Zoh, Malchus, is a Hakdama. This is an introduction to Bir, to the explanation, the Oich in Nishmas Ha'odam, that how also the same is true, just like the 4 letters of Shem Havaya hint to the Sviras, that the same thing is true in the soul of man, Nishmas Ha'odam, because we say Chelek Havaya Amoy, that his people are part of the Shem Havaya. There's Yud Kei Vav Kei in the Amoy, in the Nishmas Ha'odam. Zainen do Dugmas the Dalet Oisius Havaya, in the soul of man. There's also similar to the 4 letters of Yud Kei Vav Kei in the soul of man. So we're trying to tell you first by the spheres, and then how the name of Havaya applies to the soul of man. But when we explain by the soul of man, we don't talk about the Koitzer Shel Yud, about the Ratzah. We just talk about the Chochma, Bina, and the Midos in by the person, but we don't talk about the Koitzer Yud. So why does he have to introduce when he's talking about this? Is an introduction to tell you what goes up by the person. But when he translates how these 4 letters of Havai Yud Kei Vav Kei in Nishmas Ha'odam, how it is in the soul of man, is a nit mevayer vos is Koitzer Shel Yud. He does not explain what is the point of the Yud in the soul of man. Hein zu lieb vos darf das mevayer sein in dem Shem Havaya Lemailo. So why does the Alter Rebbe need to explain the Koitzer Shel Yud when he's talking about the Shem Havaya Lemailo, when he doesn't explain it by the person? And that's the whole purpose of bringing down the Hagdama Lemailo, the Shem Havaya, to explain how the Shem Havaya is in the Nishmas Odom Chelek Havaya Amei. So why does the Alter Rebbe need to, even in the parenthesis, bring that down? So this is going to be understood with these diyukim, Shloimar, the bir in them. So we can say, explain this. Das was der Alter Rebbe is the Meidich in dem Inyan von Chelek Havaya Amei. This that the Alter Rebbe goes into at length explaining the idea how his people, the Nishmas Ha'odam, are part of the name of Havaya, Chelek Havaya. Why is he bringing this? Why is that important? Why we need to know that? Is bichdei tzarois bringen. He wants to bring out vidur chatoyim is men poigem in the Dalet Oisius from Shem Havaya, that through a person sins, you blemish the 4 letters of the Shem Havaya. Since your neshama has the 4 letters of Shem Havaya, and when you do a sin, you are blemishing the name of Havaya, which is in your soul. And then, undurch teshuvah, once you repent, you do teshuvah, you return, izmen ma'oire du yud gimel midas harachamim, then you awaken, you arouse the 13 attributes of compassion, yud gimel midas harachamim. Hanim shoches merotzen elyon baruch. They extend from the level of rotzen elyon, the supreme rotzen. Shalamaylo maylo mibchinas hahashpo anishpas meoisis shem havaya, which is higher and higher than the level of the flow, the normal flow that comes from the letters of the Shem Havaya, Yud Kei Vav Kei. That's the usual way, but you arouse to get the flow from higher, from the Midas Harachamim, Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim, which is much higher than the flow that comes, the hashpah that comes through the letters. And they clean out all the blemishes in the Daled Oisis Shem Havaya, in that 4 letters of the Shem Havaya Yud Kei Vav Kei, they fix it. The sin caused blemish in the letters of the Shem Havaya that's in your neshama, and when you're ma'orer, the higher level, the hashpoah for the Gimel Tzarachmim, that cleanses the pagamim that you made in the neshama and the Shem Havaya. But the issue right now is, how do you get to that higher level to be ma'orer? If the person is only connected to Yud Kei Vav Kei, Chelek Havaya Amei, so how do you get to the higher level to bring down the pagam? And that's why the Alter Rebbe brings down also the Rotzen Elyon is connected in a hint in the Koitzer Shel Yud. Stellt sich die Scheile. So then the question arises, Iden seinen doch Chelek Havaya Amei. We are part of the name of Hashem. Chelek Mishem Havaya Baruch Hu. We're a part of the name of Havaya of Yud Kei Vav Kei. Hein wie kennen sie zukommen zu Bechinas Rotzen Ha'elyon? How could they come to the level of the supreme will, the level of Rotzen, level of Yud Gimel Sarachamim, which comes from the Rotzen Ha'elyon? Shalamayla Mayla Ba'isis Shem Havaya, quoting that are higher than the letter of Shem Havaya. How does the Yid reach there? So that is Bavoren the Riber der Alter Rebbe gleich b'tchilas ha'inyan. So that's why the Alter Rebbe immediately in the beginning of this subject, as euch Rotzen Ha'elyon is verbunden mit Shem Havaya. Also the supreme will is connected to the name of Havaya. Nor nit mit die Oisios von Shem Havaya, but not with the letters of Shem Havaya, which is Yud Kei Vav Kei, nor mitten Koitz Sha'al Hayud, but with that point which is on top of the Yud. So, as Chelek Havaya, since the Yid, the Shem Havaya, Yud Kei Vav Kei is part of Hashem, the Yud, and the Yud has a Koitz. Is verstandig, as Iden kennen, zukommen durch Teshuvah, that the Yidden are able to reach through Teshuvah, euch zum Koitz al Hayud, also to the point on top of the Yud, because they do have the Yud in themselves, and the Yud has the Koitz. And the Rebbe further explains now, because we're saying there's an association between the Rotzen Ha'elyon, the level of Keser, to the act, the Koitzer Shel Yud, connected to the Yud, also explains how it can fix the other letters because it is part of the letter. If it was separate and it wasn't part of that yud, then it would not be able to cleanse and fix the yud ke vav ke in the pagam of the neshama in the yud ke vav ke, because it would be something different. Let's look inside Dalet. Oder inyan. Here, this idea as rotzon ha'elyon was is menake kol ha'pagomim, that the supreme will which cleans all blemishes is verbunden mit koitzer shel yud, that it is associated with the point of the yud, that it is connected to that yud. But the point of yud, git euch a verstand, that also gives us an understanding. V'azoi bechinas harotzin, how the level of rotzin, is l'mayla ma'osis shem havaya, which is higher and higher than the letters of Shem Havaya. How could that level of rotzin can menake sein die begomim was in the oisius? How could it clean the blemishes in these letters? Is because even though it's much higher, but it's still the koitzer shel yud, the lechoyre, it would seem. Bishloima voses ken von dort kumen di slicha mechila. We can understand how come forgiving, atonement, forgiving comes from there. We understand, kemen verstehen. That would be understood. Warum wie bald ados is an oir eliki, since this is a godly light, the light that comes from Rotzen Ha'elyon is a godly light which is beyond, was is nit melubesh in tziyur oisis. It is not dressed up in the formation, in the form of letters. It's not yet, not Yud Kei Vav Kei, it's higher than Yud Kei Vav Kei. Hotter nit kein hagbolos, that's why he has no limitation. Und die Metzias von Nivroim vernemmt dortun kein Ordnit. And the entity, the existence of creations, does not take up any room over there. It doesn't matter. It has no bearing on a level which is higher than a godliness, which is higher than being dressed up in any shape or form. It's beyond letters. And since the actions of the lower one doesn't touch there, it doesn't matter at that level. That's why from there extends forgiving, and atonement comes from that level, because it's a level which the person's action doesn't really matter. We from there, you get atonement. So we understand atonement, but we don't understand how could it clean the Yud Kei Vav Kei, because it is connected. That's why, because it's the koitzer shel yud. We can over bechinas harotzin, but how could the level of rotzin, was is l'mayla ma'osis shem havaya, which is higher and higher than the letter of Shem Havaya, which means ze is mushlo von tziyur oisius. It is negated. It is not dressed up. It's separate. It doesn't have a shape of letters, tziyur oisius. How could it menakum memalazayin the pegomim in the oisius? How could it clean and fill the blemishes that are in letters when it itself is beyond letters? How could it clean them? Und das wird beworben durch die Werte von Alten Rebbe. This is answered through the words of the Alten Rebbe. As Rotzen ha'elyon is verbunden mit dem koitzer shel yud, that the supreme will is associated with the point of the yud. Das haste, which really means to tell us, as Rotzen ha'elyon is nit legamri mushlo von the oisius havaya, that the supreme will is not totally negated from the level of the letters Havai. It's not like no connection to the letters of Yud Kei Vav Kei. At the same time that we're saying that it doesn't have a form, it doesn't dress up in the form of letters, but it's not totally negated from the letters. Adrabah, the contrary, Eris the Haschola, he is the beginning. Ratzon Elyon is the actually beginning, and it's the root and the source from the oisius, from the letters. As it is literally when you write, you have to start with the point of the yud, and then you go to the point. Punkt wie in Pashtus, just like simply, literally, beim Schreiben dem Shem Havaya, when you write the name of Hashem Yud Kevavke, hört man on mitten koitze shala yud. How do you start? You have to start with the point that it's tam the yud. Und der Pfarrer is a memale de begomim de oises, and that's why he fills the blemishes in the letters. So both, how could we reach the neshama? It's because how could a yid reach to the higher when he is Yud Kei Vav Kei, he's associated with the letters, the neshama is associated. How could he reach higher? No, there's the koitzer shel yud. How could the koitzer shel yud, how could the Ratzon Elyon menake? It's because there is a connection. Because it's the beginning of the yud. Now we also understand for was später in the Igeres Hateshuvah. Later on in the Igeres Hateshuvah, when the Alter Rebbe is mevayer, when the Alter Rebbe explains Virotzin ha'elyon is menake kol ha'pagomim, how the supreme will cleans all the blemishes. Again, Zokter Nochamol, over there he says again, as Rotzin ha'elyon baruch hu is nirmas bekoitzu shel yud. He says again that the supreme will, blessed be he, is hinted in that point of that yud. As quoting, this is Merotzon ha'elyon baruch hu hanirmas bekoitzu shel yud, shalamayla mayla ma'osis shem havaya v'lochem menakim kol abgom. He says there that from the supreme will, blessed be he, which is hinted. Again, he brings down this point of the yud that is higher than the letter Shem Havaya, and that's why he cleans all the becoming. So now we understand it doesn't really seem fit l'chayre. The l'chayre tamua. Similarly, this is surprising. L'may nafkamina dot zogan. Why is it the difference over here to tell us as Rotzon ha'elyon is nirmas bekoitzer shel yud? Why does he have to tell you that it's hinted in the koitzer yud? Adarabah. On the contrary, he doesn't want to associate it to the letters. He wants to say that this is higher. The atonement comes from there. Adarabah will doch da bringen. On the contrary, he's trying to bring out in that sentence, Virotzon ha'elyon is l'mayla ma'osis shem havaya, how the supreme will is higher and higher than the letter of Shem Havaya, and that's why it brings the atonement and it cleans the letters. So is vipasdo de hadgosha. So how does it fit the emphasis as Rotzon ha'elyon hot shayches oisius Havaya, that he emphasizes that the supreme will does have a connection because it's koitzer shel yud, a connection to the oisius Havaya. But the Rebbe explains, makes this all clarifies all this, because in order for it to be able, take, it's higher than the letters, but how does it associate? How could it clean the letters? What's the connection? The Alter Rebbe wants to bring out that while it's higher and higher, but it's still associated with the letters, that's why you can clean it. Analysis verstandig. Based on the above, it's understood. In order for the supreme will to be able to clean the blemishes in the letters, we need the both ends. We need to say it both. Es muss sein von an Ort, wo es nicht on the begomim von chatoim. It must come from a place in which the blemishes do not touch, do not impact over there. It's higher. It's higher than the letters of Shem Havaya, but yet it still has to be connected. to the Oisius. It still has to have a connection to Oisius. Nirmas bekoitzer shel yud. It's hinted in the koitzer shel yud. In the point of yud, there's a connection. So the Alter Rebbe basically introducing this whole idea and bringing in the Rotzen HaElyon and the whole thing is to explain the association of Rotzen HaElyon. That's how you can get atonement, and that's the guy. But it still has to be connected while it's higher and also connected. So how do we sort this out? We're saying that it's not a letter, but yet it's on the kude koitzush ala yud. It doesn't have a form. It's not part of the letters, the Rotzen HaElyon, and yet it is still the koitzush ala yud. If it's a koitz, it does have a form. Rebbe explains in Oisei. But we need to explain on the other hand. Trying to say it's l'mayla milo, and now you're telling me that it's associated because of the koitzush ala yud. So we now understand. So then it does have expression in letters. It does have form. Those was chatoim seinen poigim in the Dalid Oisius Shem Havaya. The fact that sins blemish the four letters of Shem Havaya, Yud K Vav K. Und the Nikui HaPegomim is funan ort, and then to clean these blemishes comes from a place was is hecher von der hashpoa hanishpas Shem Havaya. Comes from a place that is higher than the flow that comes from the letters Shem Havaya. Shem Havaya gets blemished, and in order to clean it, it has to come from a place which is higher than letters. Is as so how come? In the godly light is as well the oirely key was melubesh in oisius, because the godly light which is dressed up in letters hot atziyur v'hagbola has a formation, is formed, has limitations by the level. That level of godliness which is represented by the shape of the letter that it descends in has a limitation and a form. And therefore, there is room for human existence. Could do an avera. The formation and the limitation is loit der tmuna from them ois. It's according to the picture, to the shape of that letter in welchen that is melubash, in which he is dressed up. The godly light dresses up. And the letter Yud and the letter K and the level of Vav and level K is dresses up, and that is a limited formation of that Oir Havaya in that letter. That's why it gives room, space for the human existence, for an entity of the human. And that's the service of the person, whether he does a mitzvah, doesn't do a mitzvah. It is a limited godly light which comes down according to the shape. So, almost seems like the same thing is with the koitzer shel yud rotzen HaElyon. It also comes down in a shape. Is like them need move on. So according to this, it's not understood. The Baal das oich rotzen HaElyon is nirmas bekoitzer shel yud, since the supreme will is hinted in the point of the yud. Unis der has chole v'sherish umokor. And that is the beginning, and that is the root, and that's the source from the hashpo hanishpas Shem Havaya. It's the source and the root from the flow that comes from the letters of Shem Havaya. It comes from the level of Rotzen HaElyon. Heißt doch, so that means as di bechina, that also this level, the level of Rotzen HaElyon, it has the beginning of a formation. It's already begin to form its shape. It's begun to shape. The koitzer shel yud and the source, everything is shaped from it. And therefore, because it's shaped, it's also the beginning of the existence of creation. So how come in that place in the Rotzen Elyon it doesn't impact it? Sin doesn't make a blemish in the Rotzen Elyon. The Rotzen Elyon is actually atones for everything. And the Rebbe says like this: even when you take a look in the level of Yud, we're saying that relative to the other letters, Yud is only a point. But yet, because it's a point, it still has an existence of a point. So this is an existence of a koitzer shel Yud, of a point of the beginning of the Yud. Ishem being the Oishis Shem Avaya, just like in the letter of Yud Ke Vav Ke itself, is doch der Oish Yud beginnes the Kud Levad. It is only a point, onatzir. Thus, it's not formed yet. It doesn't have any shape, no width and no length. Was das weist as in Mitzias is mittel. That points to the fact that the existence of Chochmah is effacement, self-effacement, negation, not existence. Von deswegen, and yet, the fact is that it's still a entity. There's a letter, it's a yud, while it doesn't have space, but it's still a letter. So which means it's a metzias from bittul. It's an existence of negation, of effacement, self-effacement. It's existing, but bittul. A bittul metzias. So therefore, the godly light which is in this letter Yud has a tzir, even though it's a bittul mitzir. That therefore it has a connection to mitzias, to an entity, and therefore können ihr werden abgaben. That's why they can be blemished. So this should have been the same thing with regards to the point of the Yud. Although it has even less shape than the Yud itself, it's just the point of the Yud. Since it's still at the end, it's still a Metzias. It takes up space of the ink on the parchment. It takes that point. So it should turn out as the Yud, that godly light which comes in the form of the point of the Yud, that the level of Rotzon Elyon, it's connected to a shape and limitation. It does not negate totally the existence of Nivroim. How could we say that Nivroim's action don't matter over there, and we get the Nikui and the Slicha from there? And the Rebbe goes on further, he's Vav to say that this question is not just about the Koitzer Shel Yud, but really it's a question about the Yud itself also. Because we're going to see that by the Chokhmah, we talk about the light that expands from Chokhmah, but in Chokhmah itself, we're saying there's a lack of Mitzias. But why is there a lack of Mitzias in Chokhmah itself? Which will give us the key why the Ratzon Elyon also is not really the Mitzias, the early key that wouldn't that would be blemished through the actions of the below. Let's look inside. Bob in Emerson is the Zelbe Shaila to Chochma Yishud. In truth, the same question is actually as it relates to Chochma, the level of Yud. Warum der Pegam was ken werden in Bechinas Chochma? Because when we talk about a blemish in Chochma, is not in Irgufa, is not in Chochma itself, wie der Pegam in Oisius Hey Vov Hey Bino Zo Malchus. It's not the same. The blemish, when we talk about the letters of K Vov K, which is Bina Zo and Malchus, it's not the same blemish as in Bina Zo Malchus as it is in Chochma. Nor blois in der Bechine hamispashetes manner, using the Alter Rebbe's Lashon, the level that expands from Chochma, but not in Chochma itself. In the other spheres, the level of Chochma which expands to the other spheres, there is a blemish, but not in Chochma itself, as opposed to Bina and Zoh and Malchus over there, the blemishes in them itself. Vatam, what's the reason? Bald as the ganze Metzies von Chochma is bittel, since the entire existence of Chochma is bittel, negation, nekuda levad, it's only a point, canal, is in Meir Echod Emes, in her there shines the truth, the one truth, who levad who is lost, that Hashem is only and there's nothing else. So there's no real Metzias. B'meila is dort nitzaych zu werden apagam. Over there, it doesn't really fit to say that in Chochma itself there's a blemish durch achisoren avedus hanivroim, by the lacking of the service of the created beings, so that their lack of service should blemish the Chochma itself, because Chochma is a vessel in which it lights the Ein Sof, the Eir Echad Emes, so it cannot be a blemish in Chochma itself. Nor der Far was Chochma is showing a Metzias from Bittel, but because it is a existence of Bittel, yes, it's Bittel, but it's a Metzias of Bittel canal, can von ihr nicht tauschel werden. That's why from it could evolve a Metzias v'Yeshus Mamish, there can be an actual entity, und der Far can werden apagam in der Bechina mispashetes mimeno. That's why a blemish can occur into the level that expands from Chochma, but not in Chochma itself. So the question is nicht verstandig. It's not understood. Bald as Chochma gufa, since Chochma itself, nicht nur the Bechina mispashetes mimeno. Not only that which expands, but when you look at Chochma, is verbund mit Ois Yud, it is connected to a letter, the letter Yud. Darf Ois kommen, so it should turn out as the Eure Likisha b'Chochma, that the godly light which comes through Chochma, Hotatzir v'Hagbola, has some sort of a shape and has some limitation, because there is a physical manifestation in the letter Yud. I'll call put him from Ois Yud, let it be at least a letter Yud, a small, very small Mitzias. And therefore it should not be negating the existence of the Nivraim. Why is there not a blemish in Chochma itself? Same thing like we asked before on the Koitzer Shel Yud, in the end of the day, it takes up space. It's a dot to begin the Yud. The same question is on Chochma itself, because the Rebbe brings out the blemish that takes place is that it's mispashetes menu, but not the Chochma itself. But why, the Rebbe asked, why isn't Chochma itself a Metzias in the shape that it takes up the space of the Yud? And this is what the Alter Rebbe, the Rebbe says in Oizayin, is coming to explain with this diyukim. Od die Shailes werden bewornt in the diyukim l'shoynes von Alten Rebbe. These questions are answered in the specific languages of the Alter Rebbe, was the Tate Merkton in seine Oranal, which my father points to in the above note. As es is do achiluk in im Eufon hashayches from the spheres to the oisius, that there is a difference in the connection between the spheres to the letters, how they connect. The spheres bina zo malchus. The spheres bina zo malchus, which correspond to K, Vav, and K, seine nichlolis v'nirmoses. They're both included and they're hinted in the oisius K, Vav, Hey, Vav, Hey. The letters K, Vav, K, they're included the bina zo malchus. Und der Fahr wird in sei Gufa der Ziur v'hagbola von the oisius. And that's why in themselves, in the Bina, Zoh, and Malchus, they get the shape and the limitations of these letters. Then that's why the sins blemish them themselves, because they are included and hinted in the name of, in the letters of K of K. As opposed to Chochma Rotzen Keser, werden nicht nichlal v'nirmas in them Yud v'koitzer shel Yud. They're not included and hinted in the Yud v'koitzer shel Yud. Says nor was there Yud v'koitzer. It's only that the Yud and the point of the Yud, seinen aremes, if they're just a hint of them. Aber sie werden nicht neslabish v'nitfas in them tzira Yud v'koitzer, but they are not dressed up and caught up in the shape of the Yud and the koitzer. They are not really become part of that shape that doesn't shape them. Und therefore, in the Chayich HaPagamin Zeh, there's no blemish in them because they're not, the Chochma and Keser are not caught up and not limited, they're not shaped by them. And in that, because they're higher from the shape of Oisius. And there is a difference between Remes and Mirames, between Chochma and Keser and Rotzen. And in Chochma v'Rotzen Gufa is the Achilek. Chochma Rotzen itself, there is a difference. In Chochma v'Rotzen Gufa is the Achilek. So there is a distinction. And by Chochma is the Nekudas Hayud Miramezes l'Chochma Yisbarach. Over there it's Miramezes with the Mem. Was mit a Mem b'tchilas hateva, with the Mem in the beginning of the letter, Vertzi Loshen Kovid. It is a Loshen Kovid, a heavy language. The Rebbe brings down and over here in the Hara 22, the exact, but it basically means as is merer in the remiza. It represents more. The hint has more. Was weist in unser Fall, in our case, that would mean if mer shayches beremes al korponim, it shows to a greater, more of a connection in a hint way, at least from them ois yud to chochma, from the letter yud to chochma. From them is moving. From that, it's understood as is do akitzas shayches, that there is a somewhat of a connection from oira chochma mit nois yud with the letter of yud under far. And that's why is shayich in ira pagam. That's why it is applies to ira blemish al kolponim in der bechina mispashetes bimenu, at least to the level that expands from her. Mashen came der koitzer shel yud, but the koitzer shel yud is blois roimes, not merames, only roimes. Loshen kal, a light language, lesser of a Lebchinas Rotzen Elyon Baruch Hu, to the level of the supreme will, to the level of Kesser, level of Rotzen. Aber der Rotzen Gufa hat nicht kein Kiruv zum Koitzer Shel Yud. But the Rotzen itself does not have any closeness. It's Roimes, it's a distance to the Koitzer Shel Yud. Und der Fahr is in Rotzen Klau mit Shaykh can become. That's why Rotzen it is not Shaykh at all, not even a Mispaship Imenu. It's totally separate because it's only Roimes, not Manamis. Azoy vert recht. And that's how he also becomes understood. Okay, we understand. Vi in Rotzen seinen Dobeidik Tzovis. In Rotzen, we have these two extremes. As hot as Shayches zum Koitzer Shel Yud, it does have a connection to the point of the Yud, and durch Koitz zum ganzen Shem Havaya, and through the Koitz to the entire name of Havaya, because it's the beginning of it. Was der Far is menak bemal the begomische boisis. That's where he can clean and fill the blemishes that the Rebbe spoke earlier. Has to have a connection. But on the other hand, as wird klau nitfas in dem Koitz, it is at all not captured in it. It's only reimes in a far away way. Azoyas is bleibt the maila moisis Shem Havayit, so that it remains higher and higher than Shem Havayit. Und der Far wird dort nit on kein chet. That's why no sin touches there. And that's why there's no blemish applied over there. So that is the case with the level of the Rotzen Ha'elyon. That's the further even than the level of Chochmah. The level of Chochmah is a remes, but still, there can be a blemish. But the level of Rotzen Ha'elyon is only remes from a distance. It still has a connection, is a hint to the Koitzer Shel Yud, but yet it doesn't capture itself at all. So it's connected enough to be able to bring about the cleansing and the fulfillment of the Pagomim, but it does not impact over there. It's higher than Shem Havaya, and no sin reaches over there. Ches. And the Rebbe wants to explain this idea by bringing an example from a talis and tzitzis to show how there is a connection, and yet it's removed from the idea of the talis. The tzitzis, the talis could have a very high madrege, and yet there's no kedusha in the talis that remains versus the tzitzis. Let's look inside. Ches. We can explain this through an example, the chilik between talis and tzitzis, the difference between talis and tzitzis. A talis gashmis hot nit shum kedusha klal. A physical tal garment, the talis, has no holiness at all. And you're allowed to use it for weekly matters. As opposed to tzitzis. Is aber nit der pshat, so it doesn't mean as the talis hot kein shaychus nit to der mitzvah. So we're not really saying that the talis has no connection to the mitzvah. Adarab. On the contrary, the Arizal schreibt, as the Arizal writes, is kedushas hatalis gedoyla malos godla malos b'me'od me'od al kedushas hatzitzis. Its holiness, its sanctity is much greater, much greater than the sanctity of the tzitzis. Because the far zayin and the tzitzis blois nimim nimshochim and hatalis. That's why the tzitzis are only strands that come from the talis. So what does it mean that we're saying that there's no kedusha at all in the garment? But the in them is, what is the idea? In the tzitzis was einen blois nimin, in the tzitzis which are just strands, is do an oir mitzumtzum. There is a light which is restricted. Was wird nislabish in the tzitzis, that dresses up in the tzitzis. Und der Far wird a kedusha in the tzitzis gufa, and that's why there becomes a sanctity in the tzitzis itself. Mashenkin kedushas hatalis, as opposed to the sanctity of the talis, is an oir shalamayla mikli. Over there is a light. It's like a greater light, but it's higher than the vessel. But can it nislabish werden in talis? It cannot dress up in the talis. As is nor was talis shamakifa sa'odom. It's only that the talis that surrounds the person is a remes for their makif. It hints, but it's not the makif itself. It's not vibaldas der makif is nito be his slapshus in talis, and since the level, the makif itself, is not dressed up in the talis, in the talis, the ribber is aimed at talis agash mishum kedusha klal. That's why it doesn't have any physical kedusha, because it's not dressed up in it. It's just the remes, just like we're trying to say by the rotzin. Elyon is the remes in the kudesh, but it's not there. It's not dressed up. And the Rebbe explains this also now in above the level that doesn't really manifest itself, not nislabish. In der test, in der Dugma Hanal von Talis Retzich wegen einer Makif, we're discussing about such a surrounding light, was is legamri hecher from shayches to kelim. It is totally higher than having a connection to the vessels. The far is nitokei shum kedusha in ir. That's why there is no kedusha in the talis. Bizas mutalish tamash bodivrechel. You can use it for weekly matters. The dugmoso lemailo yesh loymar. So what it would be the example above for this talis is bechinas anoichi, is the level of anoichi. We say anoichi, you're saying is the loy istfas b'shem, v'loy isrames b'shum ois v'koitza klal. It is not caught up, can't call him a name, but just say I. I is not caught up, there's no name for him. And also, it's not hinted in no letter and no point at all. Was in dem Wort Anoichi is nitok kein kedusha von Hashem. The word Anoichi, there is no sanctity of a name. Anoichi is not a remes of bechinas Anoichi mishanoichi. It's only a hint for the word I, whoever I am. Atzmusi Yisbarach. The Anoichi itself doesn't carry any kedusha. Al derech zeh is oich in dem oir v'sot hashayches to oisius v'kelim. The same thing is in the light, the oir aliki, that is connected to the letters and kelim faran tzvei yifanim. There are two ways. Aleph, der oir vos ver nislabish un nitfas in the oisius. You have the light which dresses up and is captured in the letters. Ledugma, as for example, a Rabbos is masbir advar seichel, a teacher who explains a intellectual matter, was the svore is melubesh in the Verta from Rav. Over there, the idea is dressed up, captured in the words of the Rab. Beis, you have the oirvos kenit nislabish werden in oisius. You have the light that cannot dress up, come down in words. Says nor was the oisius seinen aremes of nor. We have a different set. These letters are hinting for the light, but they're not capturing them. Ledugmas, for example, a chida, a riddle, was the verter for the chida, the words of the chida. They're just hinting on a deep idea of a spasni zu zogen, but it doesn't fit to say, as the dvar seichel is melubish in the chida, that the item of the idea is dressed up in the chida. Similar, there's the two ways above. And now using the language of that statement, so we say itfas b'shem, Isram is v'koitzer. We say Noichi is not captured in a name. There's no name for it, and it's also not hinted in a letter or koitz. Itfas b'shem, captured by the name that oir vert is samtzim und is sich mislabish nitfas in der shem. When it does come in the name, when it gets captured in the name, that's talking about the oir that is restricted and is dressed up and captured in the name. Und the far vert in them oir atzir, and that's why that light gets the shape like der tmuna von Oisius Hashem, like the shape, like the picture of the letters of the name. That would be the level of itfas b'shem. What is the level of Isrames be'ois v'koitz that is hinted in the letter and the point? The shayches zwischen dem ois v'koitz mit an oire leki, the connection between the letter and the point with the godly light is in them was in zeyer tziyur is do aremes oifen oir. So the connection with the godly light is only that in their shape there is a hint for the light, not captured, a hint for the light. Ledugma, as for example, the nekuda von Ois Yud is a remes von bittel von Sfiras HaChochma. That hints to the subjugation of Sfiras HaChochma, meaning the shape, the fact that it's merely a point points to the fact that there is bittel. Under koitz sha'ala yud, and when we talk about the point which is on top of the yud, was is nit kin tzuras ois, it's not even a shape of a letter. Nor blois aremes bilvad. That's merely a hint. Is aremes oif keser was is nit begeder asogel klal. That points to keser, which is not at all grasped. Vert nisgalen nor bederech remes, and is only revealed in a hint way. That's the connection between the letter and the koitz, only in a hint way. Aber der oir gufo wird nit nislabish v'nitwas in dem tzir ha'ois v'koitz. But the light itself does not dress up and is not captured in the shape of the letter of the point. It's just that they're hinting to something. Azoi, as their shaykhis is not their chremes, to the extent. So, what is their connection? The only connection is that there is, in a way, of a hint, not isrames bishum koitz voice, not a remes, and then there's itfas. And this, the Rebbe says, is the difference between the difference we have keser, chochma, and the rest, and bina zomachos, yud. Das is der biur in the drei chilukim. This is also the explanation, the three differences from keser, which is rotzen, chochma, number 2, and bina zomachos. And then, on the other hand, number 3, bina zomachos. In keser, seinen nito ken kelim. In keser, there is no vessels. He is nit shayich, as soll nislabish und nitzvas werden in an inyan. It doesn't fit for it to be dressed up or get caught up in any inyan. I feel it in a koitz, not even in a koitz. It cannot be captured there. You can hint to it, but it cannot be caught up in it. So he's nervous there. Koitz shall yud is a remes of him canal. It's only that the koitz shall yud hints to him. In Chochma seinen shoydo kelim. Over there's vessels. Aber the kelim seinen bebechinas oir kiyidua. They're vessels that are in the level of oir. Was the far is the ganze Metzias von Chochma bittel, the entire Metzias Chochma, because also the kelim are oil canal. Und the river is oich in Chochma nit shaykh zu zogen. And that's why even in Chochma you can't say as he wird nichlal oder afilu nirmas in a ois v'keli. Cannot say that it's included and that it's hinted in ois v'keli That's why the Loshin is the other way. They are not nirmas. She's norva the nekudas ayud is a remes. So the niyud is the remes. They are not nichlal. They are not nirmas in there. But it's only that the nekudas ayud is a remes from bitl v'chochma. That point of the yud points hints to the bitl of chochma. Siza ois amitzias. It is a mitzias. Aber sein tzir is nekud levad bitl, but the tzir is just bitl, and therefore it's only a remes. Yud is a remes. It's not nirmezes in it, but that's a remes for it. Baldober as a sign of fordo kelim and chochma. Still, there is kelim, even though they're oiris. They're like the oiris, but they're still kelim. As a mitzias from bitl. Some mitzias middle. The river is dog. Tzas shayches zwischen dem Yud mit Chochma. There is somewhat of a connection between the Yud and Chochma. Because the far is the Yud nit roimes merochik. It's not a far roimes, nor meramezes lechochma says Baruch. With the mem, which is a kovid, which is a hint. Mit a zugetrogenkeit kin al sivkain, with a closeness, with a connection, as we said before, Zion. Siv Zion. Bina zo malchus for seinen eures hamislapshi bekalim, and bina zo malchus, which are eures that dress up in kalim. Nichlolis vinirmoses, they're both included and hinted in the oisius cave of K. Say vern is slabish, venitzvus in the oisius. They are dressed up and they're caught up in the oisius. Bis ze vern via tail funzei. They become part of them. Nichlolis, they're included in them. That they are included in those letters. Yudalef. Pianal kemen euch masber sein, was euch bei Bina zo malchus. We can also explain, because while we understand why it says nechlol is by why nirmozis, over there it's much more than nirmozis. The Rebbe explains now why, even though it's nechlolus, it's still nirmozis. We can also explain was euch bei Bina so malchus sagt nicht nur dem loschen kolal nichlolus, nor dem loschen remes. Why are we saying hidden? But we're saying that it's caught up in there. Nor nit wie bei keser v'chochma. It's not like by keser v'chochma as the Asius cave of K sein merames of zeh. It doesn't say by the keser v'chochma that they're hinted, nor as they were nirmes in the Asius. Not that the letters hinted them, but they are hinted in the letters. Avol P as the Reiram Islamish Beisius vet nit stayer loider tmunas Oisius. Even though that the light that dresses up in the Oisius becomes shaped according to the shape of the letters, it forms nit stayer according to the form of the letter. In welches they werden established canal in which they're dressed up, is do ober achiluk zwischen dem Zier von der Oisius Kelim Gufa und dem Zier Shebaoir. There is a distinction between the shape of the letters themselves, the Kelim, and the shape that takes place in the Oir, that is the Slavish in the Kelim. In Oisius v'Kelim v'bald as in Yonam is Metzias. When we talk about letter Kelim, since their function is mitzias, is that tzir shebahem atel von their mitzias gufa. Their shape is part of their essence. Aber der oir was mitzad atzme is a aposhut. But the light of the spheres, which in essence is simple, not form. She's nervous at his mislabish in a keli. It's only that it dress up in a keli and he gets the form of the keli. So that shape is not acquired to him in its inner. He still remains shapeless in essence, even though that he got in the shape. Kidu the moshel of them, as it's known, the example of this von Mayim was gefinnen sich in a kalirter klei zchuchi. So you have pure water which find themselves in a colored glass, and you can see through the colored glass, and you'll get the water will look like the color from the glass. As those was the mayim zenzich k'nigav nageli, the fact that the water appear to have the color of the vessel is this nitkin shinu in the mayim gufa, that is not a change in the water itself. They remain plain. It's just the appearances. So the oil that is mislabish in the keli doesn't really become shade. Und das eine der zwei Lashonos nichlolis und Ramosi. That's why we have two languages, both included and hinted. The keli von the spheres werden nichlal in dem Tzir von the Oisius. The vessels of the spheres, they are included in the Tzir of the Oisius. They become part, Mashenken the Oiris Shel spheres, as opposed to the light of the spheres. Hagama ze seinen do in the Oisius, even though they find themselves within the letters. The Baal Zayin be slapshus in Kalim, because they are dressed up in the Kalim. Is as ordinor ba'ofen shel remes. It's only in a way of a hint. It's not their essence. V'yesh loymar as euch in mitzvahs v'zei zaynen tochtolin shem havai. Also mitzvahs that also are hanging on the name Yudke Vavke and the Esser Spheres. Seine dot dugmas the zwei inyoni we have similar to these two levels of the Oiris and Kalim. The Maisa HaMitzvahs, the act of the mitzvahs, was an ongeton in Kalim and Dvarim Gashmi. They're dressed in the physical matter, in the vessels. Seinen Tluyim in the Kalim from the Spheres, they are hinged on the vessels of the Spheres. Und Kavonas HaMitzvahs, the intention of the mitzvahs, was seine nit verbunden kolkach, are not so much connected with the dvorim gashmim, mit welchem is mekayim the mitzvahs, with those physical matters with which you do the mitzvahs. Seine tluyim in the oiris shel spheres, they are hanging on the lights, the oiris of the spheres. So now we understand, because there's two parts, oiris and kalim, and the oiris really don't fully change up. So that's why it's nichlo v'nirmes. Apikol anal yud beis. Apikol anal, based on all the above, it euch werden verstandig, will also become understood. Was benegeya zu chochma zokt men euch bechlolos, which as it connects to chochma, we also say in a general way, the mloshen nichleles v'nirmezes kenal si beis. That by Chochma we also say both nichleles v'nirmezes. Brought down in the beginning, Chochma is also not only nirmezes but also nichleles. Ben meret vegen Chochma legabi bechinas ant hu da apikas asar tikunim chochol chulu. When you talk about Chochma relative to the level of ant, you have set forth the 10 tikunim, which Chochma is one of them. Was is in ganzen Hecher von the Yud Spheres, the level of Ant, which is totally higher than the 10 Sidres. Is bald as euch in Chochma seinen do eures wie Kelim, since in Chochma there is also eures and Kelim wie in the andere Spheres as in the other Spheres. Sagt man dem Loshen, that's why you say the Loshen, v'chol ha-Yud Spheres, euch Chochma. Then we also include Chochma and say have nirmezes, nichlolis, v'nirmozes, b'shem havaya baruch are included and hinted in the name of Hashem havaya kivavke. Mashein came v'meret v'gn chochma legabe the andere spheres. But when you talk about chochma relative to the other spheres that are below from bina and lower, is it bald as the kliya chochma zayne b'bechinas oir, since the vessel of chochma are in the level of oir. Zokman, then you say as the Nekudas Hayud is blois, Veramezes l'chochma she's baruch. That's why it's only hints the chochma she's baruch. So when the Alter Rebbe details them, he just says Veramezes kenal barucha, as we speak, as we said earlier at length. The Yumtek Yoiser, this can be sweetened al pi hayedua, based on what's known as in chochma seinen dot zwei madreges. That chochma has two steps. Alle viziz mitzad atzmo, that Chochma itself in its own hecher fungili, which is higher than revelation, bechinas seichel hanelim kol rayon, that level which is called the seichel, which is hidden from any Rai in any understanding, was done is the hecher von his slapshus, and then it's higher than dressing up, similar to kesser. Beis, we see steht schon in atnua von gilui, as it's standing in a movement of revelation, was done is the began that his slapshus, bishara yutzvirus. Then it's in the definition of dressing up as the other spheres. Und der River, der Shas, der Alte Rebbe wird wegen Yud Spheres, the 10 Spheres, redt wegen Chochma Vizis begeder his Slapshus. He talks about Sodra as it is his Slapshus. Und das Fahre sagt Bechola Yud Spheres, Oich Chochma, Nichloles in der Mose B'Shem Havaya Baruch. They're included and hinted in the Shem Havaya Baruch also because he's talking about the slapshus level of Chochm. But when he's talking about Chochma itself, Chochma is Bechinas Helam V'Hester. He wants to bring out Chochma is hidden and obscure, was Dugmosu Benefishis. That's similar in the soul is where Zogt weiter Bechinas Seichel Anelam, the hidden Seichel, Zogt nor Meramezes Chochmas Yisborach, not included, but only Meramezes for Chochmas Yisborach. This is Mesichas Shabbos Parshas Nitzavim Tovshin Lamed.